This is 1 in 44, a presentation of Anderson Center for Autism. 1 in 44 is a weekly show devoted to autism spectrum disorder.
Good morning and welcome to 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, Chief Development Officer at Anderson Center for Autism. And this morning I am speaking with George Bailey, who's the president of a company called zPods. George, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being on the show. I know that my colleague, Tracy, met you at an event, and after going to your website and checking out what zPods are, or at least the early part of the story, I'm sure you're going to fill in a lot of gaps for me today, but man, those are cool and seem super, super impactful for the people that are providing testimonials on your website. So thank you for coming on the show. I would love it if you could start by just telling us about yourself and your background, and then maybe getting into zPods and starting to tell us your story. I promise you, Absolutely. I will interject with questions along the way.
I'm not worried about that. Happy to answer them too. My name is George, and I grew up in California. I married in Utah I was married actually a woman that I met on a blind date. And we married after 3 months of knowing each other. And
wow.
Yesterday.
Universe at work.
Oh, yeah. And we actually celebrated yesterday our 16th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Actually, one of the fun parts about that was, posting about it on Facebook and showing people, hey, this is us when we got married. And I look like a little boy, and then all of a sudden this is us right now. And I've got my 5 kids, standing next to me and my wife. And it's very incredible how much, how fast time goes by. Our oldest son in that picture is Joseph, and Joseph is autistic. And so, autism has been a part of our lives for a very long time. And, it's actually just really wonderful to be able to raise this boy. He's just great,
I saw him in the videos. I loved his last question in one of them. He was sort of very provocatively said, have you ever slept in a zPod? And I was like, no, but I want to. That's cool.
It's so great because he just kind of assumes when he asks, have you ever slept in a zPod? He just assumes everybody knows what a zPod's bed is. Yeah. No, actually, no, not everybody knows. But,
Well, we're going to try to help with that today.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm excited about. It's just kind of getting the word out about this idea that we have. We're still very much in our infant stage as a business. We qualify as, what you would call a startup, to be sure. But Joseph, part of this journey was just kind of, getting to know what makes him tick. And one of the things that has always jumped out to me is that, he has a hard time initiating sleep at night. Not as difficult as many of the parents that we talk to, but certainly something that sticks out. And, where at night we would put him to bed and he would just bounce around his room and, not want to settle down. He was just so fidgety and just so excited. And yet, I think that one of the misconceptions that comes out of the autism community a lot is, well, because these kids don't sleep as much, therefore they don't need as much sleep. And that's totally false. Mm-hmm. We're finding a lot of ties between kind of how much you sleep and how well you behave the next day, how good you feel, your body, your mind, how well it operates, how well it absorbs new information. And this is universal. Autistic children not being an exception and yet experiencing exceptional difficulty with sleep. And so Joseph would, he'd have a hard time settling down. And I didn't really give it much thought because it was not the kind of emergency in our home as it is in other homes. I mean, it's like it wasn't really affecting my health, it wasn't affecting my wife as much, but at the same time, when I started teaming up with my friends, and this kind of brings you to the zPods part of the story. Yeah. We were looking at these capsule beds that had been created for entirely different reasons. Mm-hmm. If you know what a capsule bed is, it's a bed that is inside of an enclosure, and the enclosure is part of the bed. Mm-hmm. And they use them very frequently in hostels and airports throughout Asia, and this is kind of spreading itself to other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, we were bringing them to the United States, kind of thinking like, what else can we use these for? And one of the things that really jumped out for us was the idea that we could, help autistic kids to settle better. Now, I balked at this. The reason being that, as an autism parent, I just kind of thought like, well, man, we get sold all sorts of stuff, and I don't want to be, just pushing another, thing out there if it doesn't have a substantial difference. And that's when I started asking a lot of people in the community, like, hey, do you see a need or anything like that? And I got actually a lot of positive feedback to the effect that, yes, sleep is a real issue in autism, which to that point, I never had really attributed Joseph's energy at night to autism solidly. But then I started to see, okay, I guess this isn't just my son being a boy. This is,
right.
Yeah, which is hard to differentiate. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to interrupt just for a quick second. I promised I would, right?
No worries. Yeah.
I try to warn my guests.
True to your word. I love it.
I just wanted to throw, because I think I saw in one of the videos on your website, which I found really, really engaging, is it something like 80% of people with autism, or at least children with autism, also have a sleep disorder or
it's up to 80%, and there's some estimates that go higher. There are some that go lower, but it's probably around there. It wouldn't surprise me because as I've talked with other parents, it's universal. And I believe that the underlying cause for that is the sensory processing disorder, which is found in up to 90% of kids with autism. And certainly that makes sense in the case of my son. You could see that he's just obviously in some way, from a sensory perspective, dysregulated.
Right.
And so, for us, the question is, well, does giving them this place where they feel safe, is it going to have any sort of an impact? But what really sealed the deal by a long shot was when we started our first case study in November of 2019. And there was this kind of this convention that we were at, and we ran across a mom who saw our bed, and she's like, oh my gosh, this would be like perfect for my daughter who's 13 years old, and she has schizophrenia and autism, and she sleeps in the closet, and I want to get her. Yeah, so it was just like everything was just like perfect for what it is that we wanted to see. And yet, that being said, we made no medical claims.
Yeah,
we were really, conservative about it. And to this day, we tell people, like, look, we don't know if this is going to, be the silver bullet for your kid. We've just here are the stories of the kids for whom this has worked. And if you see any similarities, then you may want to give this a try. So we're really careful about that, because I don't want to prey on parents' hopes. And that was like the number one hesitation for me from the beginning. But now,
I'm sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah,
when was the beginning? How long have you been in business?
I mean, we've been in business for about 3.5 years, but really it was that 3 year. It was close to 3 years ago now. I mean, it's 2.5 years and some change that we came across Natalie, and a lot of that building up to Natalie was just market research and just kind of like getting to know. And we had other projects we were working on. zPods was not our exclusive focus. It really didn't become an exclusive focus until, early 2020. That's when it really started to like, okay, we're going to do this. But it was Natalie's experience that really sealed the deal. And that was, she jumped from 4 hours of sleep a night to over 10. And she's held that average from then till now. I still stay in touch with the family. And watching that was very shocking because I didn't expect it at all. I just thought, like, can you imagine what would happen if she was getting like 6 or 7 hours of sleep? Wouldn't that be a game changer for the family? I did not entertain the possibility that it was going to actually put her at what is a normal level for her age group. Teenagers,
I was going to say, really she's a teenager, right? So
teenagers should be sleeping, 9-10 hours a day. And I mean, it's different for every kid. But on average, that's not abnormal. Right. And so in any case, once we saw that was really the beginning of zPods right there. It didn't matter that we were doing all of this market research before then. What really got us kickstarted was that event. And then, subsequently we started working with a lot of families, and we were seeing similar events with kids who had similar behaviors at night. Including my own son, who probably sleeps a solid 1 to 2 hours more than he used to, maybe 3. It's, my wife and I give a lower number, she gives a higher number because she's the one who is most likely to hear him up until 11 and 12, but it's one of those things where we do want to understand the science. We don't want to just kind of push this out there. We're actually very motivated right now to do clinical trials because we think that that's super important within that community to kind of, I don't know, I find that a lot of these parents, they don't just accept things on whims, because there's so much stuff that's pushed their way, that it's something that, I want to be able to give them. And so we're actually working with some professionals from the Thompson Center to be able to put together the clinical trials necessary to be able to, get this done. And of course, that has the added benefit of making insurance coverage and other funding sources a lot more available.
Yeah.
Because now we have the science behind it. And it's not just like, it helps kids sleep. It's, well, what kids though?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know, like what kids, and even like, okay, autistic kids. Well, which autistic kids?
Right.
I don't think it's going to be all of them.
I think I'm going to stop you there just to pause for a second. We're going to take a quick break, but you have started and sometimes answered preemptively some of the questions I was going to ask you. But I think I want to take a quick break and come back. And if you don't mind, I'm going to follow up with just a couple of points that you made to reinforce those. But this is all really exciting. And we'll certainly make sure before the end of the show that we talk about, finding a zPod, how to get them, what's coming next and all of that. And maybe even how to get involved in some of these clinical trials if you're looking or will be looking at any point for that. So thank you so much, George Bailey from zPods. This is 1 in 44, the weekly podcast on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky. We'll be right back.
Hey, Joe, I thought you were retired.
Living on a fixed income is tough. So here I am, an essential worker.
I know. I mean, food prices are going up every day. Thank goodness for benefitscheckup.org.
Benefits what?
benefitscheckup.org. It's a free website where people over 60 can find help to pay for food, medicine, even utilities. I got $1,200 a year in benefits. Maybe it can help you.
And now, 1 in 44 continues on 100.7 WHUD. This is a weekly community affairs program presented by the Anderson Center for Autism.
Welcome back to 1 in 44, the weekly talk show on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky, and today I'm speaking with George Bailey, who's the president of a company called zPods. George, can you remind us how where can people find you? I assume you're on social media, but also you have a website.
Correct. So on social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and on our website, it is zPodsforsleep.com.
FOR, not the number 4, right?
Yeah, no gimmick. No. We're straight shooters here. I don't trust them.
zPodsforsleep.com. I just want to also underscore for any listeners who want to learn more about zPods. Really, you have a number of really nicely done videos on that website that are short, easy to watch, and just in the couple minutes that it took me to watch maybe 2 or 3 of them, I certainly got a sense of what the zPods look like and what families and some of the kiddos are saying about what the experience has been like for them and how they've been impacted. So I definitely encourage people to check out zPodsforsleep.com. Okay, George. Here's my line of questions. You mentioned, well, first of all, can you just give us an overview of the bed itself? What size are they? Do you put special emphasis on the comfort or the type of mattress that's in the bed? I know that there's some tech involved, maybe a lot of tech involved in the beds. What's the balance between tech, functionality, and comfort, and how do you make that all work?
I that's a lot of questions. Let me see if I can kind of take this one down. There's a question mark at the end of a very long sentence. I'm going to see if I can do that. So when we started out, the bed was not originally designed for autistic children. It was just designed to be a capsule bed. And so you had, just you could control the light and the fan system. And we liked that. We liked the simplicity of it. But the complexity was really in the structure of the bed, which took 3 or 4 hours to set up. And it was very heavy. And so, as we started getting this thing off the ground, one of the big questions that we thought is like, well, how can we make this better? And one of the solutions was we need to get all of the manufacturing back to the United States. And we have to simplify the structure substantially because it was difficult to assemble And it was also just very heavy. And so we thought like, okay, what about, if we do convert to an all plastic bed, and it does have, bolts and things like that keep it stable. And we started working with a factory in Minnesota that totally helped us redesign the bed. And what was super exciting about what they did, and a little bit shocking, was that we were able to reduce the the assembly time from 3 or 4 hours down to 20, 30 minutes.
Perfect.
And the
very
weight,
appreciated by families raising a child with autism.
Yes.
You don't have 4 hours to make a bed.
You don't. And then you have to pay someone or something like that. And so we thought that would make it easier for the families to be able to do it. It's a lot more intuitive. And not just that, but the weight was about half of what it used to be, which was a huge deal. Now, that's not to say that it's not heavy, because it is a very durable piece of equipment. Each component, some of them weigh 25 pounds, some of them weigh, about 120 pounds or 90 pounds, so you do need to make sure that you've got two people that assemble this. But the thing is that made it so that we could assemble a lot faster, and it makes it more modular so that we can now start building on what goes in the bed. Like, we have the lights, we have the fans as before, but now we also have speakers, Bluetooth speakers. So if you want to listen to white noise or some sort of restful track, and, we're in the process of developing an app that goes along with all of this.
Nice.
So that parents can control it from the outside, or so that parents can determine the times that any of these components may be turned on, and that way, that was one of the things that parents told us, like, we want this. And we were constantly listening to parents, and, we take a step back, a few steps forward, and it was always just this learning experience in listening to them and being responsive and letting, and kind of the customer's always right type of mentality.
Yeah.
So we continue to make that a really important part of our development. The current bed right now, again, it's fan control, light control. You can control the color of the lights, and you've got the speakers. But there will be other elements that we're introducing later, which we're very excited about. And some of them I'm not going to quite say on yet.
That's okay. You can have your secrets.
But the great thing is that modifying the bed with time is now going to be a lot easier than whatever it used to be before. If you had a part that busted on the last bed, you basically had to buy the last bed again. And that, and I own two of the original, made in China versions, and they're great. I think that they're wonderful, but now, if you have a defective part, then we fix that. We have warranties on the bed, a lifetime warranty, all the plastics, a 1-year warranty on all electronics. And we make sure that, and they're easy to put right back in. It's not like you have to kind of completely disassemble the entire bed. Now, some parts may be a little bit harder to get to than others, but it's not like it used to be. And that's another, kind of sigh of relief, that in some ways we're simplifying it, and, trying to make it all the more durable and usable for a kid, who's, 5, 6, 7 years old. So that's what the bed is like. I don't know if I answered all those questions.
You did.
Did I shy away something?
There's one follow-up that you may not have the answer to right now. I don't know. But as I was watching those videos and hearing you talk, I mean, you and I both know, as to most of our listeners, that autism is a lifelong disability. You do not outgrow autism. And while you may develop, and hopefully, I'm sure, everyone continues to grow and develop skills and interests and more independence, one of the things that I think really stays with people for probably their lifespan is a lot of that sensory sensitivity, whether it's you sort of light on the sensory stuff or really heavy on the sensory stuff. So I'm curious if you've put any thought into eventually creating larger beds that an adult can sleep in.
We have. And currently the bed fits a standard twin size mattress, which is going to fit most people. I mean, I'm 6'2", I fit.
Okay.
So it's about 6 feet 5 inches from end to end on the inside. And so, it's not an issue, but, it was really, we actually started thinking about this a little bit more when we were talking with firefighters, who are on average very, very, very tall individuals. And we have worked with a few autistic adults as well, because you're always kind of exploring, is there any other community in which, an enclosed sleep space is actually really helpful. And so there are other communities we look at, and even within, autism, adjacent to autism, you have things like ADHD, OCD, schizophrenia. And in all of these circumstances, we're finding, there's actually a really strong connection. And often in those circumstances, you've got people with, sensory processing disorders. And as you said, you don't necessarily grow out of those things. I mean, we all learn to adjust, but that's what we do as a result of being human.
Yeah.
That's one of our most amazing traits as human beings, is that we
Absolutely.
adapt
Yes.
very, very well. And yet I want to accommodate the best I can as well.
Right.
So the goal is, bigger beds, let's go there. Yeah.
I love it. I'm just going to put my 2 cents out there, because there's an aspect of adult life that I think when people often, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a taboo subject, but it's one that some people don't like to talk about. And so I always like to put it out there that adults with autism also get married and have families and have spouses, or stay in long-term relationships with a partner. And the idea that that family life is so impacted by already what you're doing. You could see in the testimonials that, obviously when anybody who's raised a newborn knows that when your child sleeps more, you sleep more, or at least you feel more relaxed and rested because your child is getting the sleep that they want. And so that's a huge family impact. But another one from a different perspective is, a really beautiful part of intimacy for so many people is being able to, lay in bed together and sleep together and wake up together. And I love that there might be some help maybe for some couples in the future who want that, but for other reasons, just maybe choose to not.
And then that's such an outstanding point, because it's one of those funny things that as a society we've created kind of a need for that, and some couples they feel the need and they derive a lot more kind of joy from that, or comfort, and some couples are actually fine not doing it. And a matter of fact, one of the things that you're seeing even in the mattress movement is this kind of bifurcation of the mattress.
Yes, the up down.
And the reason why it's done is because the fact of the matter is we all have different sleep needs, and I want to kind of make sure that I slip in there the really big picture of what we're trying to do. We're not just creating a bed, we're creating sleep solutions. And, because at the end of the day, if the bed's cool, that's great, but you want to see better sleep. That's what we want to see. And the environment is a critical component, but nobody's really able to quantify the environmental components, which is something we're working on. And I believe we can make possible by having a kind of a constant within a variable heavy, scientific study. So by creating a constant, then we can start working on some of the other variables to figure out okay, how much light and what kind of light does this person need? And then all of a sudden, once you start making a bed that adapts to the individual person, and this is the cool thing, there's a great book out there, I'm just finishing it up right now, called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. He's a British scientist. And in the last 15 pages, I just got to this part and almost jumped out of my seat. I've got to reach out to this guy, because he basically starts saying all of the things that I've been saying are going to happen. And that is that your room, your space is going to adapt to you as an individual. And this 40 years in the future, this is what's going to be happening. Whether we're part of that remains to be seen. But I really feel like this is coming, where, you get into your bed is, you're using sensor technology, which we are helping develop right now with some biomed engineering students at Washington University.
Great.
Your bed is going to be able to pick up all of your different sleep patterns, and it's going to know what you need as an individual for temperature. Because have you ever complained that, my wife, it's so hot in here, and, I want it a little bit cooler.
Yeah.
We've all had that. That technology is coming. And so we're excited to be part of that push. And I think that we've found a very critical component that allows us to be able to measure these types of things with more specificity. And I think enclosure, it's not important for everybody, but it is important for at least a large, community of people.
Oh yeah. And important and even preferred, if that's even that might become part of it too, where it's not, I can sleep this way, but I prefer to sleep in a different way. I just think everything you're talking about is really, really cool. I love the combination of the coming together of data and science and innovation and creativity, and applying it to a very sort of underrated, I think, but incredibly important part of every human person's life. And unfortunately, we have to stop there. But I want to thank you, George Bailey from zPods, for coming on the show and telling us about these beds and the future and your passion. And I encourage everybody listening to check out zpodsforsleep.com or find zPods on all your social media channels. And let's stay connected and hear more about how this is going. And really, everybody check it out, because just looking at them, they are, even though they're a lot more than cool, they're also just really cool. So
thank you.
Thank you, George.
This has been fun, Eliza.
Appreciate you too. George Bailey from zPods. This is 1 in 44, the weekly pod show, the weekly podcast on topics related to autism spectrum disorder. I'm your host, Eliza Bozensky. And remember, Anderson cares.
You've been listening to 1 in 44, a weekly presentation of the Anderson Center for Autism. Join us for another edition of the show at this time next weekend.